All right, so here's my audience.
Hi.
All right, guys. I'm Jordan. I'm gonna hand this to you. All right, so I've got some visuals for everyone. So I'll hand this to you. Give you one, two.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kearney, I'll give you one.
All right.
You don't get one. Yeah, special.
Here's my good one.
All right. So tonight, my speech is on analysis of prison labor, also convincing you that it should be more regulated and possibly outlawed. So, slavery is undoubtedly the nastiest stain on the American history since the country's founding in 1776. While the majority of American citizens believe slavery to have died after the American Revolution, that is simply not true. Over 150 years after the ratification of the 13th Amendment, the amendment which outlawed slavery, American men and women are still being used as slave labor today, and specifically in prisons. While the 13th Amendment outlaws slavery, it does justify slave labor and involuntary servitude in certain instances. One instance being in the form of cheap or non-compensatory prison labor. This small but unjust sect of slavery runs rampart in the American prison system due to the lack of policies that protecting inmates, they have steep wage garnishments and negligence by the common American. Prison labor, although justified in the 13th Amendment, needs to be regulated and kept in check in order to protect Americans from the injustice of slavery. Cheap labor that borders on slave labor seems rather hard to fathom in the land of the free and home of the brave, but the reasons for it are quite transparent. While measures have been taken to combat slavery, many of these measures fall short of doing any good. One example of this is International Labor Organization, which was first conceived to eliminate forced labor. This organization also established a convention which, with the premise of that work cannot be hired or placed at the disposal of private individuals, companies, or associations. The convention was established in 1930, and as of 2018, only 9 countries have not signed this convention. By the U.S. not ratifying this convention, it put itself in cahoots with countries like China and Afghanistan. So, if the U.S. did not adopt this convention, the ways in which, or if they did adopt this convention, the ways in which our incarcerated individuals could be worked would be more regulated so as to stay as far away from slave labor as possible. This would guarantee a standard wage for all workers, regardless of the job. Currently, incarcerated individuals have or are working at Starbucks, packaging coffee, producing goods at Victoria's Secret, and also answering phones at various jobs. While prisoners have been the main source of cheap or free labor, detained illegal immigrants have also been used. Many times, illegal immigrants have been used to help fight wildfires down the Mexican border. These jobs are very arduous and can prove dangerous when inexperienced individuals are forced into these roles. Furthermore, illegal immigrants are paid the least amount of monetary compensation, even though most times they do much more dangerous tasks. By the U.S. ratifying the Labor Organization Convention of 1930, the compensation of illegal immigrants would also be appealed to. Even though the 13th Amendment blatantly outlaws slavery, it does not broach the subject of financial compensation. In an article written by a former correctional laborer, Chandra Bazelko states, "After deductions, I earned between $525 and $875 per week. These earnings would never have been viewed as being fair or compensatory 50 years ago. These cheap wages are somewhat hard to fathom, and even more hard to understand are how these wages are calculated. The answer to these questions can be answered by LFOs, or legal financial obligations. An LFO is a legal financial obligation, such as taxes, restitution, room and board. And these charges can eat away as much as 80% of a prisoner's paycheck. The costs help pay for the mass incarceration in the United States. Proponents of prison labor argue that this form of work is a way in which inmates can give back to society, but the biggest argument in support of loose slave labor policies come from the belief that incarcerated individuals need to pay retribution in order to repent or cleanse themselves from their crimes against society. The problem with this argument is that inmates are already given back to society by ways of community service, wage garnishment, and LFOs. and also by time served in correctional institutions. So, the main argument that restitution by way of cheap labor is the only way that inmates can repent of their sins is fallible. In conclusion, forced labor and involuntary servitude, although justified in the 13th Amendment, needs to be regulated so as to not infringe upon the borders of slavery. This can be done by stopping drastic wage garnishments, reshaping policies and conventions that govern enforce the labor standards, and by educating the common person on the hidden world of slave labor. The current lack of standards regulating forced labor is atrocious and needs to be changed. While many Americans fight for an increase in minimum wage, others, such as incarcerated workers, fight for the chance to make minimum wage. Slave labor is still alive in the United States of America, and it needs to be rectified. This change can only happen with the cooperation of the government and the support of the American population as a whole. And that is my speech.
Yeah.
Sorry, I could hear them singing the whole time. I was like,
Did you keep a